In the middle of one of the hottest summers in recorded history, a silent, terrible crisis is brewing in the United States, and it's not the alleged housing crisis of 2023. Millions of Americans face eviction in August. Families find themselves in a very peculiar situation, as they're being forced to choose between feeding their families or keeping the roof over their heads. How will these folks survive these dark times, and is there any hope in the foreseeable future? While most experts call America the strongest economic power, it is not without tragedy, as many renters are on the verge of becoming homeless. A sad part of this is the absence of any help or solution in sight, as many experts predict that things could get worse from here. Tenants are in a state of panic. Hardworking Americans who are barely coping with uncertain economic conditions now have to make even more gutsy financial decisions. Amidst having to make tough financial choices, parents have to keep this harsh reality away from their children. Barely 3 years after the pandemic that shattered the economy and left millions jobless, and in many cases, neck-high in debt, this gruesome reality is paralyzing families. Will the government step in to help? Families are crying out in despair, crying out for help. But how did we get here? How did this crisis become so bad? It's debatable that homes have ever been affordable, but what's certain is that affordable housing is scarce. As of January 2019, the U.S. had a total shortage of about 7 million affordable housing units for lower-income renters. 37 affordable homes were available for every 100 low-income families. Now, in 2023, things are getting worse. Not only are there fewer homes, they're more expensive than ever. If you think that's ridiculous, rent is at all-time highs. Just look at this chart as it describes how rent has increased by 11% from 2019 to 2023. Are lower-income Americans doomed? In this back-breaking economy where inflation and talks of a recession have negatively impacted the dollar's value, housing costs are ridiculously high. This exact scene is what we see play out in the homeowner debt-to-income ratio charts. As we discussed in previous videos, the debt-to-income ratio is how much of your gross monthly income is used to pay your mortgage or housing costs. Current statistics from this chart show DTI climbing to all-time highs of 40%. This means that folks who are already renting a home are suffering to pay rent. You see, apart from showing the current predicament of home renters, DTI is something any mortgage lender will use to gauge your ability to pay a mortgage. An ideal DTI ratio for a mortgage approval ranges anywhere from 36% and under. In fact, some underwriting guidelines cap an applicant's overall DTI at 45%, which includes all other debt. Is there any way for our fellow Americans to escape this looming danger? Is there relief? Or will the U.S. homeless population get worse? Before we answer that, take this minute to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss other videos like this. It can go a long way. Right now, the rapid increase in rent across the United States is being attributed to inflation. But it's not the only cause. A major contributing factor to the current rise in home prices is supply. And as we mentioned before, the supply-demand relationship plays a major role in any market. While the housing market never runs short of customers, it can certainly run low on available homes. As discussed in previous videos, here's a chart from the National Association of Realtors. It shows that the number of homes sold in the U.S. is 40% less compared to the number it was 15 years ago. But let's just say there are enough houses available. Let's assume the 2.6 million Americans facing eviction this August have alternative homes they can rent. How much will they spend to buy a new house? This Redfin chart shows that the average single-family home now costs about $422,000. If you break that down into a 30-year mortgage at 6.5%, that would translate to about $32,000 in yearly payments, or roughly $2,700 a month. Meanwhile, as of July 2023, the average monthly income of an average American worker stood at $4,600. So, just like the DTI chart revealed earlier, folks are using nearly half of their salaries to pay the rent. Add the massive tax and the crazy cost of food and energy to that, and you see that the American dream is in danger. And we wonder why new home buyers are putting in less money down for a typical mortgage. People have to feed themselves and pay bills. In 2006, we experienced a similar housing bubble, while the average home buyer was still putting down roughly 20%. Fast forward to our recent bubble market of 2023 buyers are making down payments of less than 18%. Suppose you're wondering why. Well, taxes and inflation weren't nearly as bad as it was back then. Plus, home prices have more than doubled. A silver lining in this dilemma is that according to CoreLogic, a leading data expert in the real estate space, as of May, mortgage delinquency rates returned to a historic low in May 2023. What's even crazier is that while potential home buyers are waiting for a crash, renters are hoping not to get evicted. According to the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, more than a third of the U.S. population account for rental housing. There are over 870,000 more rental households today than at the beginning of the pandemic, which is a staggering number. According to a study by Freddie Mac, between 2018 to 2020, the housing stock deficit increased by 52%. As the undersupply of homes in the U.S. soared from 2.5 million units to 3.8 million units. According to Eviction Lab, out of the 10 states and 34 cities that they track, landlords have filed for over 2.6 million evictions since mid-March 2020. But what's causing this to happen at such an astronomical rate? I would argue wages, housing rent, and inflation in general. Some experts are praising the fact that rental prices aren't increasing as much since the pandemic, where rent hikes were as high as 16 to 17%. But the fact of the matter is that rent prices continued to climb in July. According to the Rent Report by Rent.com, the national median rent price is now $2,038, which is only $15 less than when prices peaked at $2,053. This high cost of rent isn't just specific to one metro area of the U.S., but all. However, some areas like Columbus, Detroit, and California seem to have the highest price increases. The year-over-year rent increase seems to have plateaued, but renters are still feeling the burden. There's a looming financial crisis right now, as the feds are pushing interest rates higher and higher, and prices of goods and commodities keep soaring higher by the day. Gas prices used to cost about $2.19 per gallon in 2020. But right now, prices are at $3.90 and climbing. Also, popular groceries like eggs cost about $1 per dozen 3 years ago, compared to current prices of $4 per dozen. Americans have to deal with all of these and still deal with over-the-top mortgage payments. How is that fair in any way? About 40% of homes in the U.S. are bought outright, and this isn't because of real people who need a roof over their heads. Some affordable housing advocates blame investors and flippers who want to make the most profits off of the high demand in the real estate market. This is one thing that has led to a great scarcity of homes. In the first quarter of 2023 alone, about 41% of investor purchases were made for starter homes, meaning that even first-time home buyers who would have loved to pay for a simple home outright are denied the privilege to do so. The only way out is for these folks to settle for mortgages that dig deep holes in their pockets. With the current economic uncertainty, the demand for starter homes is high, but the supply is extremely low, and yet prices aren't friendly at all. And while new home buyers are still praying for a housing market crash, renters are facing eviction. Eviction filing rates are soaring in the U.S. as we speak, and some cities are witnessing a 50% increase in the number of evictions filed weekly. Sadly, this impacts our most vulnerable Americans, low to lower middle income earners. You see, even before the pandemic, low-income Americans were paying almost 50% of their income to keep a roof over their heads. Fast forward to today, post-pandemic living. It goes without saying that our people are spending more than half of their minimum wage income on housing costs. It's quite a sad situation, especially because no help seems to be coming from the government. Most eviction moratoriums have expired. And of course, no help is coming from investors and landlords either. Nobody wants to risk losing money in an economy like this. And so, the end result of this fiasco is that people are served eviction notices. The whole situation becomes even more appalling when you consider some of the junk fees U.S. tenants have to pay. Things like pet fees, pest control fees, and other arbitrary fees add to the financial burden of renters. The market today is brutal and unforgiving, squeezing low-income renters to the very extreme. Statistics show that about 28% of American households earn less than $25,000 annually. And yet, average rent as of 2023 is roughly $2,000. So imagine a household of 4 living in an apartment that costs $2,000 monthly. That's $24,000 a year. And yet these folks have to eat, pay for utilities, and still send kids to school. How would that be possible with high cost of housing? This is the typical scenario many families are finding themselves in today. Citizens are making the hard call to forego rent payments in exchange for putting food on the table. And when even this isn't enough, they fall back on credit cards and even more loans. It's a dire situation. And there's no hope of relief in sight because the hands of the homeowners, investors, and government are all tied. Unless this current bubble pops soon, more Americans will lose their homes in the coming months. All we can do for now is hope for a miracle. Remember to subscribe to our channel if you found this content valuable. We'll see you in the next one.